the monitoring mechanism has failed. It's all excess of 60%. The deficit financing is over 5%, including France. So clearly, as a fraternity, as an enlarged Europe, failed to deliver the goods. That's what we are seeing today. Spanish bonds are again quoting over 6%, while Qatar could go to international market, borrow 5 years at 2.2%, 10 years at 3.26%. What does it tell you? The world at large is getting reorganized. It's not confined to one single continent. The balance sheet makeup, if you look at it, is still coming to terms as far as capital adequacy is concerned. Off balance sheet securitization, if you start cleaning it up, it requires over $5 trillion in Europe. That's the level of capital infusion is required to have stable and functional banking fraternity. If you look back, they have not even complied. Some of the global powers today has to realize they have to comply in total respect to Basel II. Forget about Basel III, which is in the making. In this part of the world, we are contemplating Basel III, effective 2015. The scale of the magnitude of the issue is huge. We live in an interconnected world, interdependent world. We have to necessarily realize, unless we set an universal standard in terms of accounting or valuation or securitization, set in framework which are global in real response to global problems, solutions needs to be global. That's what we are seeing. America still reeling under pressure. I was in Japan last week for the International Monetary Fund meeting. If you look at the economic predictions, the global growth is confined to 1.3%. It was last year projected at October last year in Washington. We thought 2012 versus 13 between 2 to 2.2%. It was downward revision. In terms of the breakup, the advanced economies reeling under pressure. Euro is technically under recession, minus 0.4%. British economy is a negative growth. The rest of the advanced economies, including United States, put together 1.5 to 1.6%. If you look at a bigger picture, including emerging markets, we should be reporting around 3.3%. 3.5% was originally predicted. It come to 3.3%. If you look at the emerging markets, en bloc, the BRIC countries, so-called BRIC countries, that should stimulate not more than 5.5%. Commodity-driven, the Gulf states, where 45% of the world oil, 22% of the world gas comes from, that should produce around 5.5%. You have seen the reflection of commodity prices now. Brent is quoting under $9 per barrel, and WTI, NewMex is quoting around $89. Still, they cannot generate more than 5.5%. China is slowing down. China, 30 years, continuous 9% growth, more than 9% growth. India, 14 consecutive years was producing over 7%. Today, it's struggling at 4.9 to 5%. Possibly 5.5% is likely. That's the world. That's the economic momentum. Now, is the crisis over? The answer is no. This is not a crisis in real response. This is a reorganization required to become more ethical and moral. What's wrong in it? That's what I was trying to articulate in United Nations. I had the privilege of addressing the United Nations in May 2012. What I was trying to articulate is, look at the Millennium Development Goals. The world at large has got certain governing principles. If it has to produce enduring values for generations to come, then you have to be real. You as an individual has to be real. If you run an enterprise, that has to have its governance and transparency. Countries and continents have to be real. So that's the transformation we are seeing in the world. That's what a reflection we are seeing in real terms. So how do we fix this? How do we fix this infection? I'm a banker, not as a real doctor. I can't do surgery in real terms, but I can look at the clinical part of the international economics. And that's what I'm trying to articulate. You can only fix it by recognizing the issue, by defining the issue, defining the challenges. Some of the impending challenges we are seeing today's world is measurable. Housing market has not recovered still in the United States. We have, in 2 weeks' time, election. Unemployment is still 7.8%. Sri Lanka is 4.3% unemployment. Sri Lanka's growth is 7.2%. Inflation is said to be estimated around 6.9%. Today, the governor of the central bank, Ajit Gabral, was holding the interest rate static to make sure the growth and inflation is in balance. But look at the United States. You have 7.8% unemployment. Still, deficit financing, deficit is not under control. It's not just Congress or Senate increasing the threshold to hold a bid in terms of rating agencies. It's the world's single largest economy, where 20% of the world imports, 12% of the world exports emanates from that country. Global leader in terms of economics. Dollar as a universal currency, which is vindicated time and again after the disintegration of the euro, but still reeling under pressure. Really, the momentum which we wanted is not happening. What has changed is nothing but money supply. What you call the process called quantitative easing. It improves the liquidity by printing money, by pumping money into the market, stock market. The market gets artificial liquidity. It's not real. The hot money transcends borders. It goes from one part of the world to another part. The market gets inflated. When you print money, when the money supply is increased, the currency gets weakened. When dollar gets weakened, as a currency, when it gets weakened, rest of the alignment comes in the global currency maker. That's what the reflection we are seeing today. The challenges which we are seeing today, currency is getting manipulated. By printing money, it's not a free market dynamics. You are artificially administering a process. Like a patient who's in the ICU. You give him insulin to make sure he gets the survival instinct. He gets aligned in terms of liquidity. The water flows is dynamic enough to make sure he survives. And that's what we are in. That's the world we are witnessing. Stock market, if you look at the bigger picture, Dow Jones today is 9% up year to date. If you look at the S&P, it's almost 16% up. NASDAQ, almost 19% up. Germany, 24% up. China, 3% down. India, 21% up. France, 10% up. United Kingdom, 6% up. They are not barometers of the economy, mind you. Ideally, if you have well aggregated, well diversified index, that should be the barometer. That should establish consumer confidence. That should reflect the sentiments of the market. But when you artificially improving the liquidity by printing money, it is inflated world. That's what the reflection today we are seeing. That's the challenge. You have to deflate again. You have to unwind again at some point of time. Quantitative easing, it's not necessarily confined to a political makeup. It's a process. It's a tool you will accommodate if you have to inflate the mechanism to establish consumer confidence, to make sure the money supply transcends borders. But that's not a solution for long-term sustainable development. Euros as a currency is getting realigned. As I said, they have to rebalance the economies. Countries who have gone through extraordinary commitment in terms of fiscal consolidation have to practice that to make sure that we have real reorganization comes in for fiscal prudence. Then only you will be in a position to manage your receipts versus payments. At the end of the day, your arithmetics have to balance. You have receipts and you have payments. And you have to balance it to make sure you don't support subsidies for unwanted reasons, but you develop capital expenditure to create growth and jobs. If you don't create such balance within the fiscal frame, you will be politically driving it without having sustainability in real terms. At the same time, mind you, austerity and value creations are mutually exclusive. That's what we have seen, political unrest in Greece. So how are you going to bring in a stable and functional economy in real terms, converging on the criteria which are set in for Euro? That's a challenge. That's why today we are talking about setting new discipline for fiscal union, possible fiscal union, and issue a fiscal bond, Euro bond. To achieve that, you need to bring in banking union. America is still doing well in terms of corporate terms. The companies are cash rich, whether it's Google or Facebook, Apple or Microsoft. The country may be paying a heavy price dearly, but the bigger picture remains corporate earnings are measurable and they are stable. That's why what we need to articulate is to bring a solution for a banking fraternity. So as a prelude to the Euro bond, what Europe is trying to do is to create banking union, and then possible, because that's, if you have to bring in a fiscal union, that's politics and economics. In real terms, they have to converge. The destiny is intertwined. What you're trying to do is to dilute one economy's fortune with others. That's as a definite call for disintegration. That's not easy. Big or small, rich or poor, cultural difference, diversity in real response to the overall fraternity is a bigger challenge to unite them, integrate them, and making sure you issue fiscal union, and also making sure you issue Euro bond. That's not going to be easy. That's the level of challenge we are seeing in the global map. It's not confined to these two continents alone. Look at this part of the world. This part of the world has got enormous amount of vibration. We have seen in Tunisia, we have seen in Egypt, we have seen in Libya, we are seeing it in Syria. Arab Spring is resounding its reorganization. While the road is bumpy, there's no better word than freedom and democracy. That reflection is we are seeing in social unrest at times around the world, in this part of the world where we are going through extraordinary geopolitical frame. Iran is telling story now. The sanctions which Americans have set in, right from individuals to institutions to corporates to countries, is extraordinary. I was talking to the ambassador a while ago. Sri Lanka imports Iranian oil. How do we sister the relationship? How do we settle the score for payments when you import oil. India is struggling. Every other country who got import alignment in terms of oil is struggling. But that's a process. But the world at large is recognizing politics and economics are inseparable in real order in the changing dynamics. Now, what started as Arab Spring, it's breaking the borders, and it transcends within the Arab brethren and then impacting in real response to social dynamics. That's why every single state within the MENA definitions is trying to set in social progression, human development, making sure growth comes in, making sure job comes in, making sure healthcare comes in, making sure unemployment is reduced, making sure your gross welfare comes to individuals. Otherwise, social stability is not there. It can endanger the solvency of the political frame. That's what we are witnessing today. In the last 2 years, almost, January 2011, to date, we are seeing extraordinary Arab world. Look at the commitment Qatar has made in real response to changing dynamics. Qatar has set in a long-term vision way back in 1995, getting into the transformation mode, bringing education and making sure social progression comes in. There's human rights or freedom, whether it's education or healthcare, set in discipline to see that sustainability comes out of social progression. Then politics and economics converge. Economic progression is given, but you have to make sure the man in the main street is equally happy. That's the process. Even within the family management, you have to make sure it's a shared vision. You have to make sure that your spouses are respected. Then your children takes the right kind of direction. Social progression is very, very vital for you to see politics and economics converge. That's the reflection we are seeing in the Middle East. And that's the changing dynamics. Even affluent economies are going through extraordinary imbalances, or even see if transformations to see change comes in real response to changing dynamics. While, as I said, we are insulated from, in terms of macroeconomics, we are not isolated from the global crisis. Today, Facebook's or Twitter, individual becomes institution to see that world at large is redefining to produce gross welfare to the mass. That's a challenge. The world at large is going through extraordinary turbulence. How do we sustain a global growth with this kind of predicament? While the commodity-driven economies are sustaining in terms of macroeconomic fundamentals, running in fiscal surplus, current account surplus, investable surplus, on account of the overall till, on account of the oil price or gas price, the road is still bumpy to see you have social progression comes in, human development comes in. That's what we are seeing. That's what we have seen in the budget frame of all these economies. Today, if you look at the overall budget expenditure, Saudi Arabia set in 869 billion Saudi riyals, out of which 52% goes to human development, healthcare, education, building schools, making sure every average Saudi gets housing. Those are not options. You have to necessarily make sure the wealth gets percolated down the line. Distribution of wealth, making sure unemployment is minimized, making sure economic momentum comes into even small and medium-sized entrepreneurs. It's not big corporates alone. That's why if you look at the regulatory framework, every single regulator during the financial crisis started redefining and protecting the common man. Consumer protection is very vital for us to see through. Whether it is credit card, or a car loan or a consumer loan today, it's not deregulated. It is re-regulated to make sure your cap is set in for lending. Your price limits are set in to make sure common man can afford to pay. If you don't recognize the importance of the common man, it's all people-centric. That's the re-regulation today. We have seen even in a public-private partnership model in this part of the world. If you look at the crisis, way back in 2008, when the world at large was getting incinerated, Qatar has announced public-private partnership model. They said between 10 to 20% they will invest in every single local financial institution. And they did. They have re-regulated in many respects. Capital infusion is one aspect. Making sure you establish consumer confidence, making sure world community recognize the government of Qatar is involved in the local financial institutions. That's one aspect. Some of the re-regulations, if I have to explain, you have an investment limits. The financial institutions have learned lessons, as I said. That's why the proprietary trading was put to rest. Today, irrespective of your tier 1 capital, I have to necessarily make sure the maximum proprietary investment is permissible for 150 million Qatar riyals. That's it. When it comes to lending, we have restrictions in real terms. We have challenges to make sure you measure and manage the cross-border risk. You manage the counterparty risk. You measure and control the consumer protection. You make sure you have expatriates or Qatar is setting lending limits, setting the price which he can afford to pay. The maximum I can charge, for example, for a consumer loan is confined to the repo rate plus 1.5%. That's 6% maximum for consumer lending, mind you. Credit card, 1%. The debt servicing capacity of individual is also capped. You can't lend to individuals the way you want it. That was the definition of the problem in the past. That's why America is paying the price now. America has set in new discipline to control the credit cards. Overnight, if Paul Walker's rule was announced, that differentiate between the hardcore lending and gambling in the investment market. Speculation. Financial institutions were gambling grounds and financial markets were gambling grounds. The oil price was 147 way back in 11 July 2007. It's not an oil growth was exponential, demand was exponential. It is dollar was weak. When dollar was weak, people hedge the risk by buying commodity futures. To hedge the risk. The dollar was weak and people hedge it. If you look at the end-to-end 3 to 4 year scale, the speculation was almost 500%. That's why the oil price was 147. You can see a similar reflection time and again. People are substituting dollar with commodities like gold. Gold is no more a currency, rather, it is no more a commodity, rather. It's a currency. It's substituted. Every single central bankers have substituted when dollar was weakening. We had here in this country, way back in 2007, double-digit inflation, 14% inflation. And the market forces were getting liberalized beyond control. Then you have to evolve re-regulations. You have to moderate the whole frame. That's what we have seen. And when the stock market was collapsing because of the deregulation, the hedge fund holders who came to this market, disinvested, were running away. This market was down 40% way back in March 2009. The central bank has to come to terms and set in discipline to see the local market is not impacted beyond. They invested with a buyback option. All the local banks have manifested their investments, pass it on to the government. The government has reimbursed the money if you have investments in the local listed financial institutions or otherwise. And the government was pumping money, 1.8 billion. It's not only stocks, it is again, when we do a stress test, we use the word stress test. The bankers use the word lavishly of late. Like you run in treadmill, you go through the stress, your resilience, the speed and the velocity which you can take. Your configuration has to confine to a right amount of physical balance. And when you speed up the mechanism, the treadmill, you have to withstand the pressure. Whether your heart and lungs or your body can take it or not is a stress. That's what the measurement is all about. Institutions also can go through such a stress test. When you have deflation in the stock market, when you have deflation in the property market, how much stress you can go through. What is your risk-weighted capital is what the measurement standards are all about. Those disciplines have to be measured and managed and controlled. And if there is infringement of the core capital, then you have to redefine by capital infusion. Additional capital you have to bring in because you have to play with your own money, not with the borrowed funds. Banking by large is public. Banking by large, it is global. It's not local or it is not private. When you deal with the financial institutions, you have to necessarily realize more than the shareholders' money, you have public deposits. When I can say asset to shareholders is 8 to 10 times, when Lehman Brothers, as I said, it's 78 times. Permissible limits in terms of international benchmarks, 1 to 10 times of your shareholders' money is what you are lending out. To back it up, you have a deposit mobilized from the international markets or local customer deposits. And a good financial institutions is always backing it up with long-term liability, with long-term assets, so that the maturity mismatch doesn't create unwanted risk. But if the property market gets deflated, which has happened in 2008, 2009, it's going to impact your capital as well. So we are not immune from the global crisis. It has happened here in this region. And Dubai was visibly shaken up, and it was impacting the local market in Qatar as well. Qatar government has pumped $4.12 billion to make sure that it doesn't infect beyond, whether it is the commercial lands or commercial properties or industrial properties or residential frame. But that's part of the re-regulations I'm talking about. That's the kind of change we are seeing in the world today. And clearly, if you move to the emerging markets,